Alright, so I played a game recently called Specters of the Deep. Oh boy. Okay, straight up, if not my favorite one, then definitely in the top 5. The memory is still too fresh, and I need some time and perspective to truly understand how I feel, but either way, this was very touching, unique experience. Something similar to what I felt when I played Heroes of Myth, actually, by the same writer. Anyway, yeah, this is great. What is it about? The Kingdom of Galdrian, a magnificent island nation bordering in Avar on the island of Jarda. With a rich and storied history, it's not a surprise that it born a hero who would spawn countless legends. One day, the dragons rise and visit the island nation to offer a request. Bring us the one who'd best our challenges, and in return, you'd be given the power to rule the earth itself. But a similar declaration was issued to a neighboring kingdom of Vatrai. Together they brave the challenges and bring back the mystical gems. For years after, the wars would continue between the two nations, until one day one of them falls. But that was the start of their adventure. Okay, it's actually hard to do this setup because it's kind of lengthy. To add to that, there's also the whole line of succession, the time skip, the relationship between the two kingdoms and their heroes, which is more than a simple dispute. Also, one of the heroes actually existed for a long time after the other died, and yeah. All of this is to also say nothing about the dragon's magic and the continental politics angle. Point of the story is that it is about a legend brought back a long time after their death. What did I enjoy? There are many points, but one which will always stand out to me about this game is Cecilia. To this day, there are nearly 40 games from Choice of Games that I have tried, and they all have their merits, positives and negatives, but one consistent thing, the notorious part of nearly all of them, is romance. And romance, I didn't get enthusiastic about it once. Every single time I felt like it was crammed down my throat, forced and entirely unnecessary. I believe that all of these games would have benefited if romance was cut out entirely. More work spent on something actually fun and interesting. However, this, thus far, is the only exception to that rule. The writing for Cecilia and how the player is allowed to respond to her is second to none. And while I'm probably going to spoil something very important by even talking about this, I cannot in good conscience talk about this game and not praise the biggest draw for me, because it was truly brilliant. I cannot tell if it is simply the only character that resonated with me so strongly in all these games, or because of how unobtrusive the romance itself was, very much unlike all of these other games, but I cannot overstate it's enough how much I've adored every single interaction with Cecilia. Starting at a really rough patch, and over time winning me over harder and harder. It's, well, I think I get it now. Why people put romance into these games, it's just, but this is the only time it actually worked for me. Right, so, yeah, aside from that, yeah, it's hard to come back from that. I guess I'll start with magic, which is the thing that writer seems to always approach in an interesting way. Here it's largely 3 schools. An earth one, obviously with the eye. The king is able to grow plants, move rocks around, control everything in a castle, yada yada. The air, which is what dragons do, unlike the more typical just fly around and breathe fire. They seem to operate largely using the magical winds and sound of all things. And lastly, the most interesting one is the anatomy, which sounds like some sort of offshoot of necromancy in this context, but it's a lot more than that. I always enjoy it when writers put some genuine effort into coming up with creative usage for magic, which isn't just me cast fireball. And having it be more than a skill a player or others use is what is especially great about this writer. As magic is actually a major plot point, and not just from the perspective of the power it wields, but even politically. As there are warring factions frowning upon certain practices, plotting and scheming to undermine other people's research. Just as I like magic very much. Aside from that, there's the politics angle as a whole, which means that there's a whole history to this tiny island nation. And in the time the player spent dead, certain things arose, meaning throughout the entire game there's an undercurrent of a possibility of a civilian uprising. Together with assassination plots, and past the halfway point or so, the continent nations actually pay a visit as well, complicating everything even further. Obviously dragons are there as well. Quite frankly, it was extremely easy for me to get swamped by all the names and, oh yeah, that's the Lord blah blah blah, he's a brother of la la la, and decades prior he did this and that. It's actually fascinating just how much information is crammed in there, to a point where I think a writer should be praised for their approach as well, as the info dumps are done fairly smoothly, but just overwhelmingly enough, at just the moment where the player character would get overwhelmed as well, making it surprisingly immersive. Speaking of overwhelming, names. I've recently played an imp and an imposter, and that's the exact point I've said was severely lacking. There was a total of, 8 names, and only like 5 of them appear more than a couple of times. I believe this game, Specters of the Deep, has more than 30. With locations, names, and of people who are an ancient history. Occasionally there are also full names and sometimes just last name or first name, yada yada yada. This is a lot of work. But what I would praise here is what the game comes with its own glossary. Glossary? Now when I think about it, I've never actually heard that word pronounced. I've seen it many times written, but never said. So anyway, it's a list of names and some notes on them. That is incredible. I wish every Choice of Games game did that. I don't believe it needs to be a lengthy dossier, but just a reminder is already amazing. Like, I totally forgot who Holm is. This Holm name, what is that? Because it's never used. But it's simply the last name of a royal family, the current one. And off I go to the note and poof, up, there it is. Good, great stuff. Very, very helpful. And aside from that, I have something to say about the choices, but it's a bit difficult to point out without simply making assumptions, because I didn't play through the game many times and I don't know how much is happening behind the surface. To me, the game felt flexible and it had plenty of choices to make, with an impact of those being visible. I didn't feel railroaded into certain situations, with the only exception being very far into the game, when I was looking for a certain missing item and the culprit turned out to be closer to home than one might expect. Even then, the situation was simply a little clumsier than I would have approached it, but ignoring it. There were often times when I formed a certain conclusion and, there it is, the exact choice I wanted to make. Cecilia. Right, so, I believe the only negative I would point out is it feels like there isn't enough time to explore everything in this game what I wanted. There are a lot of stats, and some of them don't seem to come into play as much as they would seem. In addition, sometimes it felt like the choices didn't have an impact on the stats at the bottom of the list at all. Like Iris and Senna's relationship to me was very low, but I didn't recall doing anything to keep it that way. If anything, I wanted to keep them together and friendly and happy, but whatever. Same deal with open eye, closed eye stat. To say nothing about the stats underneath those still. I just don't understand or fully grasp what does the hero of the present or phantom of the past actually affect, aside from maybe some weird interaction during one-off events. In any case, I will just say that this game gave me something unique. So much so that I feel wrong going back through it, lest I do something to offend Cecilia. And I'm very satisfied with my ending. So even if I don't know if I'll play it again, I do believe it's still great and something to talk about. Honestly, very excited for the third game from this writer, Stars Arisen. I have it primed and ready. No idea of what is it even about, but with this person's track record, I only expect great things.